All right, hitting record.
Aloha, it's Antonio with hypnosisproductreviews.com. Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Michael Watson, all the way from Florida, about his upcoming talks at Hypnothoughts Live. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Antonio. How are you?
Oh, excited. I'm looking forward to Hypnothoughts.
Yeah, well, in fact, this is I think, how many have there been? This is the fourth or fifth or what?
2001. Was it 2000? No, 2012, I think. This would be the sixth, maybe?
Oh, my God. I know that there was also a online one before, the Global Summit or something like that.
Hypno Summit. Were you on that one? I don't think you were.
Yeah, I was.
Okay. I remember that. So I was actually helping Scott with setting up a lot of the talks and the workshops. Mm-hmm. And I remember I met him first met Scott in 2010 at a training Igor Ledhovsky had on the Queen Mary, and that's when he was telling me about it. Said that they're working on trying to do a live one, and it wasn't the next year. I think it was 2012 they did it.
Right. Yeah. So
Scott, thank you.
Scott, I've known Scott since he was a teenager. I get such a kick out of him because he still likes to play the teenager card.
Oh, does he?
Sure.
Was it the IMDHA that you met him through?
No, it was
or the dental.
Yeah, it was the ABH, the American Board of Hypnotherapy.
Okay, sweet. Now let's without waffling about, let's jump into what you're going to be talking at in Hypnothoughts Live.
Right into it. I'm excited about it this year because I'm doing three things. I'm doing a 1-hour program called Magic Hands, which is basically built around an idiomotor process developed by Ernest Rossi, and it's all kind of cool stuff with dreaming arms and stuff like that, and adaptable for just about any content that you might want to put into it.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Please.
The Magic Hands, I think I was exposed to something. Igor Ledhovsky had his self-hypnosis program years ago, where I think it might be something similar. Using, I don't know if it was like when you go into a trance, if you're almost using your hands as they float down to help you to resolve a problem. Is that anything similar?
Well, it's sort of like that, and I've been doing it for a number of years at conferences and things. Essentially, the short version, and there's a lot to explain behind it. But basically, there's a lot of stuff. The induction is kind of invisible, and I don't want to shortcut the description too much. But there's a point where both hands are in the air, and one of the hands drifts down while there's a review of the history of the situation and the implications of it, and everything in the past about it. And then the other hand drifts down as you start to consider possible solutions, the implications of making the change, who will be affected by it, all of that sort of stuff. So that essentially the unconscious mind is processing everything past and future about this situation and being invited through a dramatic transderivational search to find some way to resolve this issue.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I learned techniques very similar from Stephen Gilligan, except Gilligan likes the hands to come up and to sort of float all over the place, like that. This is a little tidier.
It seems like for me that it would feel a little bit better. I think if you're having your arm just coming up, you eventually get the muscle strain.
Yeah, well, good hypnosis, of course, you shouldn't get muscle strain when that's happening. And with Steve, people do things with Steve that I don't understand. But remember, he's a martial arts guy, right?
Okay, so, I didn't know that.
So he's an Aikido guy, and so there's all this interesting movement that happens between the hands and their relationship to each other, and they're both floating at the same time. And just to make the point, Antonio, that's not what I'll be doing in Las Vegas.
Okay. So you don't have to worry about people trying to take you on in your class.
No, it won't. It really won't do them any good. Because I know some rabbit inductions.
Rapid or rabid?
Rabbit inductions. Actually.
Oh, rabbit inductions.
Yeah, those are very powerful, and they work very quickly, just fast as a bunny.
Oh man, I love your humor. Okay, I know I'm looking at my notes. Like your second class, it's a 2 hours emotional choice.
Right. It begins with some of the things that you might expect. That is submodalities, for example, and using submodalities to change emotional states, stuff like that. There's some material that Leslie Cameron Bandler developed a number of years ago in a book called The Emotional Hostage, where she found some submodalities that we hadn't really talked about or thought about before, and that nobody really has since. One of the things, just to give you an example, is the idea that emotions have tempo. So that if you were to imagine what's the difference between, if you take an emotion like panic, right, and notice what that's like, and if you were to slow down the tempo of it, it turns into something more like dread, right? And this
like a vibration of it.
Yeah, yeah. So this idea about being able to modify emotions that way, but then also emotional choice is going to jump a little bit into the area of three principles, which I can't get into at length here, but essentially into this notion that, first of all, we are in fact creating all these emotional experiences in the first place. You know, most people think of emotions as some sort of disease or condition that visits them, you know. The thing that I would point out to people is that experience is a verb, you know, and our emotions are something that we do. And so this is really is about moving people into a place where they actually can be more cognizant of that fact and have a little more control of their lives and their experiences, but also with some techniques that they can use to help clients with these processes as well.
Emotional choice is a good thing. And let's see, look at my notes. And the next one is the one that really sounds tantalizing. Your pre-conference, The Magic of Metaphor.
The Magic of Metaphor. And metaphors are magic indeed. It's an all-day class. It's going to be on Thursday, by the way, the day before the weekend of the conference, Thursday the 24th, at Hypnothoughts Live. And by the way, just to remind people, they can register for that at htlive.net. So do that. They can register just for the pre-conference workshop or for the whole conference or however they want to organize it.
And just a quick note, if you look below this video or above, I'll have a link to his workshop. You can register for it.
Oh, great. That'll be very useful. Cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. I've been doing hypnosis for 37 years, and from the beginning of it, you know, metaphors have always been there, and but I've got a different take on it, because I think so many people, when they think about a metaphor workshop, have this idea that what they're going to do is they're going to show up and we're going to do some exercises and they're going to learn how to tell stories. And my gosh, it's so much more than that. That's certainly a little part of it. But there's so much more to that. Before I really started doing hypnosis, I was doing pastoral counseling in Chicago. This is back in the 70s. And in what is now a previous life in my church days. And I was doing pastoral counseling. And back in the 70s, what was the big deal in counseling psychology were creative visualization processes and guided imagery, guided meditations, you know, things like that. Everybody was using them. And I had no idea, by the way, this is how naive I was about hypnosis. I had no idea that there was any relationship between these things at all. So, you know, I'd been doing these things for a while with clients, and one day one of my clients said to me, you know, Michael, this is actually hypnosis, which startled me. I had an undergraduate degree with an emphasis in linguistics, which just made me ripe for the picking to follow the route into not only hypnosis but into NLP as well. But back in those days, just to give you an example, we did one guided process that I remember was, and it was framed as a meditation, so there was no induction, no arm dropping or counting or watch waving or any of those things, which is, of course, why I didn't realize it was hypnosis. And the person was just invited to relax and to close their eyes and to imagine that they were in a store. And this was a very special kind of a store that on the shelves they could find little packages and items that were labeled. And the labels were the names of various human qualities or virtues, or maybe some special skills, that somebody might want. So in the store, for instance, you could find things like courage or bravery or even expertise at public speaking, or whatever it is that they might be looking for. So they would look through the shelves and they would find the thing that they really wanted most. And because it was pastoral counseling, they weren't really looking for things like public speaking or weight loss or smoking, but they could have been there. They were looking for things like self-discipline. They were looking for things like optimism, stuff like that. So they'd look
Peace.
through this. Yeah, exactly. Peace. There you go. So they'd look through the store, they'd find the things that they wanted, and they'd put them in their basket. And then they would go up to the counter at the front of the store. And bear in mind, again, this is pastoral counseling. So there was a wise man standing at the counter who might have looked a little bit like, who,
The man above.
the man above. And he would look over the item that they had, and he would tell them what the cost of it was going to be. Except he would tell them about the cost in some very human terms, so they'd have to decide whether it was worth what it was going to cost them to have that. So really kind of like a sort of a hypnotic technique right in there. And so they made a decision. They made some commitment that they were going to do what it takes to be able to bring that quality forward in their lives. And that was the end of the thing. And how, in retrospect, Antonio, I didn't understand these things to be hypnosis is beyond me. But notice that it's a metaphor, right? That it's a metaphoric environment in which this change takes place. So I was doing that before I understood anything properly about hypnosis. But then when we start studying Erickson, we read all the great books. My Voice Will Go With You. There's all the teaching tales of Milton Erickson and all these things. Some people think we've got to learn how to tell stories if we want to be good hypnotists, and stories are the way to do it. And I think they overemphasize this only because they don't quite understand what a metaphor is, and they limit themselves to this idea of good stories is what metaphors is about. And some of them get sort of cut off at the gate. They can't even get started with it because they think that they don't know how to tell stories. Which is amazing to me, because anytime I'm doing a class, somebody will tell me, Michael, I really don't have the ability to make up stories. And I'll ask them, I could ask you, for example, Antonio, how is it that we happen to be doing this interview? And you could tell me something about that, and as you told me about it, you would surely mention something about hypnosis, right? And I could ask you, how is it that you got involved with hypnosis? And there's another story for you to tell about that. You might mention somebody in that story that introduced you to hypnosis. And then I could ask you how it is that you happen to know that particular person, and you could tell me a bunch of stuff about that. We've all got stories in our head. We've just got this thing that gets in the way. I think it's a confidence issue about just being able to open our mouths and, let them come out. But, we all can do it. But storytelling is just a part of it. There are these small chunk metaphors. I know, you're an Erickson fan, and one example of this is the tomato plant story. So there's this guy, I'm sure you already know this, but to get it out so that people can hear the story. There's this guy in the hospital, and he, I can't remember what it was that he had, but I think maybe cancer or something. I've forgotten at this point. All that I know is that this man's son, he's an older man, and his son is a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist, and suggested to his father, who was no longer able to take his pain medication because he developed a toxic reaction to them, that he'd like to introduce him to Milton Erickson. And the old man said, whatever you do, that'll be fine. I'll meet the guy, but I'm not interested in hypnosis. I don't want anybody to hypnotize me. I think that that's ridiculous. So Erickson, agreed. He says, well, I'm not going to hypnotize you. And he came in and met the guy. But what he said was, this man had been a florist that was in the hospital. And Erickson says, I know Joe. He says, Joe, I know you're a florist. He says, and I've never been a florist myself. He says, but I've been a farmer. And I know a lot about raising crops, growing things in the field. And he proceeds to talk to him about tomato plants and the care and nurture of tomato plants. And he says something about how you put a seed in the ground and the roots go down deep down into the soil. you know,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting, Joe, to notice that a tomato plant can be so comfortable, be so at ease and peaceful, which are ridiculous things to say, right? But there's the opportunity in that to just get something that's a parallel, and to use all kinds of embedded commands about things like be comfortable, relax, going down deeper and deeper. It was almost as though the particular content of the story wasn't nearly as important as that it created a frame for Erickson to use all of those embedded commands. And somewhere in the middle of it, something happened with the guy. He was intubated, by the way. He couldn't talk to Erickson. So he had a paper that he was, write notes on to give to Erickson. And somewhere in the middle, he had this coughing episode or something, and nurses came running in and all sorts of things. And they fixed the guy. They got him calmed down. And as soon as the nurses were done with him, he turned back to Erickson and scribbled on his piece of paper, keep talking. And, so he knew it wasn't supposed to have been hypnosis. And there wasn't any reason for them to be having a conversation about tomato plants. But the guy knew that it was working and that it was making a difference. So these are like these small chunk metaphors. And then there are people that work really hard to develop these elaborate metaphors. They've got a situation in the client's life that has, 7 other people involved. And so they've created a whole scenario that has 7 characters in it, and each of them has a very specific role that's somehow parallel to the role they have in this life, where maybe it's the father and a family in real life, and in the metaphor, it's the captain and the crew of a ship.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Well, my gosh, it is a lot of work. And in fact, David Gordon, who wrote Therapeutic Metaphors, David had a strategy. That is, he would start the interview with his clients and get some information about the situation. And then he would excuse himself. He'd say, pardon me a minute, I need to go use the men's room. And he would disappear for, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it was. But what he was really doing was he was sitting down, taking all this information that he had and literally charting out this metaphor that he was going to tell. A lot of work and maybe less work when you get the hang of it, when you get really, really comfortable with it. But it can be done. So sometimes these isomorphic metaphors, just to give you an example, can be done with where they really resolve the situation. So you tell a story, and at the end of the story, the situation that was a problem, or that it represents, of course, is resolved. So there's one about this farmer that had 2 daughters, and they were, I think, within a year of each other in age, like literally 10 months apart or something ridiculous like that. And they were having trouble developing their own autonomy. And Erickson told this guy a story, the farmer. Well, it wasn't a farmer. It was just a man with two daughters. But the metaphor was about a farmer that had 2 rose bushes that were planted too close to one another, and their roots were getting tangled up with each other, and somehow or another they needed to be taken apart and separated so that they could both learn to flourish on their own without doing damage to one another. So the story's told, and in the story there's some sort of hint at a resolution, which basically, if you think about it, is like offering a hypnotic suggestion. And that's one way to do it. I'm not really a fan, and probably because of I have certain biases in hypnosis. I think that our clients are really resourceful. I don't know that I know what the best solutions for my clients are. I think that information is in them. So I've been telling people, in fact, of all the people in the world, Igor Lodachowski, the conversational hypnosis guy, right? And I'm doing this interview with him, telling the people that I'm talking to that they should stop giving suggestions, which I only mean in the sense that I really don't like to push the river. I really like to draw on the client's resources, and the best way I know how to do that with metaphors is to not resolve the metaphor, but to kind of leave it hanging in the air somewhere. I can give you an example of that. There's a guy named Phil Beretta. He is the husband of a lady named Norma Beretta, who is an NLP trainer. And some people know her because John Grinder did a video demonstration of content-free hypnosis with Norma. That's one of the sort of classics of the early days of NLP. And Phil is just great with metaphors. And so he's got this woman that came to see him whose husband had died, and she really wasn't able to take care of business. The husband had done everything in terms of like balancing the checkbook and all of those sort of details, and she just really didn't know how to balance the checkbook or anything else. So Phil tells her this story about a little girl frog who's hopping down the road, and there's a hole in the road, and she doesn't see it in time, and so she jumps and she lands in the bottom of this deep hole in the road, and she can't get out, and she reaches up, and she can't reach the top, and she's trying and struggling. So she starts, making that noise that frogs make. I was going to say started croaking, but that would suggest something else.
Yeah, don't want that.
But making that frog noise,
A ribbit sound.
Yes, a ribbiting sound, and and as she makes it, this boy frog comes along, and he looks down and he sees her down there in the hole, and she says, "Help me! I can't get out. I don't know what to do." And he reaches one of his legs down, and she tries to reach up to grab him, and that doesn't work. And they try several things, and all of a sudden there's the sounding of a horn of a big semi truck that's barreling down the highway, and the boy frog gets frightened and runs away, and the girl frog is just left down there in the hole. And that was the end of the story. And so the woman says to Phil, she said, "Well, what does that mean? You've got to tell me what that means." And Phil says, "Well, I never explain what a metaphor is about." And she says, no, really, you have got to tell me what that means. That just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sure that there was something important that you were trying to convey, and I just didn't get it. And Phil says, "I'm sorry, I just can't tell you about the metaphor." And she went home, and she actually called him again the next day to see if he would tell her about the metaphor. And he wouldn't tell her what it meant. And she called another time a couple of days later, and he still wouldn't tell her. And he says, "I'm surprised you didn't call me yesterday." And she says, "Well, I was really busy yesterday." She says, "Because I had gone to the bank, and I had somebody teach me how to balance the checkbook, and I had done this and I had done that, and literally the metaphor was, you're on your own, girl."
Yeah, teach you how to get out of the hole on your own.
Yeah, exactly right. So he didn't resolve it for her. He just said, here's the predicament, and invited the resourcefulness of her unconscious mind to figure out what needed to happen about that.
Oh, interesting. And there's some more in there. I know I'm looking at the notes, but you're talking about the meaning-making imperative.
Yeah, well, we are meaning-making creatures, and the reason I mentioned it that way, I call it a meaning-making imperative, because we could say that we have a meaning-making faculty. That is, we by nature make meanings out of things, but it's not just a faculty, it's an imperative. That is, you have got to make meaning out of the things that happen around you, or the consequences would be that you wouldn't have a meaningful life. Whenever we're listening to somebody talking, we are making meaning and relevance to what's being said. I don't know if have you ever done anything with like the tarot cards or that sort of stuff?
I'm maybe when I was little, I don't think so, but I'm familiar with them.
Oh, kind of interesting. I mean, you can lay out the cards and you see all these different images and stuff on the cards, and you have to wonder what they mean. If you're reading, and I'm not suggesting that people should become tarot readers, and I'm not a tarot reader, and I don't even know that I go in for that from other people reading for me. But on the other hand, if I were to spread out the tarot cards for myself, I'm willing to bet you that the meaning that I would find in the cards would be something that was relevant to me in my own experience. And the reason I'm so clear about this is that we used to do a card game in the hypnosis classes that demonstrated this. And basically I had everybody take just some index cards, and they had 6 cards each. And on the cards, they were to indicate two things that they really wanted, 2 things that were resources that they had that served them somehow in life, and 2 things that were obstacles to them or challenges to them. And they didn't write the names of those things or anything about what they were. They just drew symbolic pictures of those things. So for instance, I was thinking at one point about my mother-in-law, and I drew a picture of a witch's hat. Just what, just some symbol, that comes with
is
that.
that a mother-in-law or a monster-in-law?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So there were these symbols, right? And people have bags of money and clocks, and I mean, there was all this interesting stuff that the folks in the class would do. And I had them get in a pair with somebody who, pair up with somebody and trade cards. So if you and I were doing the exercise together, I would take your cards, your 6 symbols, but I wouldn't know which ones were the challenges. I wouldn't know which ones were the things that you wanted, and I wouldn't know which ones were the resources. But I would just turn over the first card and start making up a story, including the element that's on that card. And then after a couple of minutes, I'd turn over the next card and somehow or another find a way to weave that in. And your job would be to be in a semi-trance state, that, the kind of trance that just follows Once Upon a Time or something, not a major trance. But then at the end of me telling the metaphor, then you'd be left with a couple of minutes to figure out how was the story that I told relevant to you, and what came to you out of listening to it be told. Now that was interesting enough, right? So because I didn't know again exactly what they meant, but they were your symbols after all. But then what I did was I gathered up all the cards from everybody in the whole class, right? Shuffled them together and redistributed them, so everybody got 6 cards that were not even their own.
But there were cards that were from every sort of pie, they're all a mismatch or mixed match.
Yeah, from other people in the room. So other people's obstacles, other people's goals, other people's resources, but there were symbols for those things. So they're all shuffled up, and you would get 6 cards, and I would turn over the 6 cards and start telling you a story again. Now, these cards didn't come from you. And yet, oddly enough, as you listen to the story with an ear for how is this relevant to my situation, it seems that the people listening could find some significance.
Wow, this actually sounds like a really fun game to play.
Yeah, it was a really cool game. Yeah, it was a really cool game.
I want to say something about the whole meaning making. If I'm going to interject this real quick.
Sure.
On the way to work today, I had the radio on, and the radio, it was the horoscopes, and I'm listening to the horoscopes, and I don't know why I thought this, but every horoscope I heard, they make them just vague enough.
Did you say horoscope?
Yeah, horoscope. Every horoscope. But then I heard it, and it almost sounded like it could be sexual innuendo. I was like, no, let me listen to the next one. And everyone, in like one of them, I forget what it was, but it fit perfectly. What could be like in any kind of sexual innuendo. And I think the last one was something like Taurus, like you will receive many surprises, or however it came out. I definitely attached my own meaning to it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The folks that write the horoscope, I'm going to call them horoscopes. I like that. They really, I think they really write them with enough generalizations. If we were to talk about the meta model and the Milton model, you'll find a lot of fluff in the horoscopes.
Oh yeah.
So that people can supply their own meaning. That's the beauty of the meta model, of the Milton model rather, is it allows for that. But see, here's the thing. While we're talking about metaphors, we start thinking about stories and the stories that you can tell, and what the stories mean to a given individual. But on the other hand, the very processes that we use, the things that we do in hypnosis, are metaphors themselves. I was listening to some work today. In fact, you might know Stephanie Conkle. Shout out to Stephanie. She's doing a profound somnambulism class. And I was listening to an induction that she had done with somebody. And she did what so many hypnotists do. She started out with find yourself in a safe place, and and they created this nice safe place, and it was a lovely thing. But notice that the safe place, by the way, sometimes people will pick some place that they've been in the past, and it allows them to maybe remember that sense of safety. But it also can be completely fabricated. So this idea that is central to the working of a whole lot of hypnotists is itself a metaphor, right? And through the metaphor, imagine being in a safe place, and guess what? Then you can feel safe while we're doing our hypnosis together. Another one that comes to mind is I was so lucky at Daytona Beach at the IACT convention. I sat next to Sheila Granger in the vending area. And, Sheila does the virtual gastric band or the hypnotic gastric band, or my gosh, I've forgotten exactly how she calls it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The weight band or the hypnotic gastric band, I guess. Again, there is no band, right? It is a metaphor. And we describe something to people as though it's a real thing and invite them to participate in that, in the experience offered in that description. And it actually ends up turning into some results in the real, actual world. So again, not just about telling stories, but about just making things that will further the ritual of hypnosis, that we're doing by bringing in certain elements that you want. Parts work is a metaphor.
Well, it's a huge metaphor. Like if you're pulling up on one hand, I have this, on one hand, I have this. When you're and you imagine a part of you that's floating down to your hand. I've told people there's no real part.
There are no parts. That's exactly right. There are no parts.
I'm a complex being with many, many parts.
Yeah. Well, many, many facets, aspects, whatever. This is a metaphor. This is a way of talking about human experience, which is what metaphor is, so that we really can interact with it or use it. The unconscious mind is a metaphor, for goodness sake. Hypnosis is a metaphor.
It's a great metaphor.
Huh?
It's a great metaphor that works.
It is a great metaphor. And I mean that in the sense that if you consider the presuppositions, that is what's presupposed when we're doing hypnosis with somebody, a placebo is a metaphor, right? We create rituals. That's what we do. And we tell people what those rituals will do. And they follow the ritual. We conduct them through the ritual, and the ritual does what it is that we told them that it would do. I wonder if you've ever seen a movie called The Three Faces of Eve.
Sounds familiar.
Joanne Woodward, when she was quite young, and maybe Lee J. Cobb was the psychiatrist. She was this woman that was manifesting multiple personalities. There were three of her. And they got to her with hypnosis. Now, it's rather interesting because her name was Eve Black. And so she had Eve Black and Eve White. And then there was another girl, I think it was Judy or something. A whole other name entirely was the third one. But basically, in this process, what they did was they went on a search to find out what had caused her to split. What was the thing. And so they kept sending her back into the past. And all he would do, it's too bad. The hypnosis in the movie was just, it'd be lovely if hypnosis worked that way, but he'd be talking to her for a little while. He'd say, now I'd like to talk to Eve Black. And she would just change her whole personality and be the other one. But here's the thing, is that what they did was they found out that when she was a little girl, when her grandmother had died, these were rural folks, like way back when her grandmother had died, probably somewhere in the 1920s. They put grandma in a coffin in the living room rather than a funeral parlor, because in those days, that might be what they did out in Kansas or wherever they were at. And they made this little girl who had been playing underneath the house. She wasn't out there, she wasn't with the mourners at the funeral or anything. They dragged her in to have her give her grandmother one last kiss goodbye, and they made her kiss her grandmother in the coffin. And, so she freaked out and everything. Well, there's this really interesting notion here that finding the source is all that it takes in order to be cured of multiple personality disorder. because she got better right after that. I mean, everything worked out really well. And in a sense, one of the things that's odd about that is that in some cases, that may actually be all that it takes. But that might only be all that it takes because we have convinced the client that that's all that it takes. that really what's happening all the time is there's something that we do on the surface, that is the telling of stories or the gathering of information or the interaction with the client, and underneath of that there's some way that the unconscious mind is translating what we're doing into something that it can work with. So the question is, does it work? Because, in this case of the three faces of Eve, for instance, does it work because that's what works? That is, getting in touch with the original source will cure an ailment. Or does it work because we've suggested that it would work? Because what I know is that the unconscious mind translates the metaphor, and we don't really even have to know anything about that translation. Richard Bandler is the way that I really learned this was I had been in practitioner training back in the early 80s with the Andreases in Colorado. And by the way, when I did my practitioner training, all these things were new. Timelines was new. I actually saw a timeline therapy manuscript before the book had been published that was run off on a Xerox machine, and was circulating the community. And the swish pattern was invented while I was in a practitioner training. And
interesting.
Yeah, so all of these things were new, and we started talking about timelines. The Andreases did it a little differently than Tad James. And people were describing their timelines. It's like, where's your past and where's your future? And some people would go, well, it goes from the left to the right. And some people, it goes from the back to the front, or, the various things like that. Yeah. And some people, gosh, we'd done these exercises, and some people would figure it out, and their timeline was like a double helix, and it did all these weird things and stuff, right? And it was just so amazing how people thought about time. And then Richard Bandler came in to do a special program, like a one-off program, and he wanted to do something with timelines. So with the same audience that had been thinking about double helixes and stuff, he says, "All right, now here we've got a timeline. There's your past over there on the left. Here's the present right here in the middle, and there's your future over here on the right." And we're like, "Well, no, wait a minute. My timeline is like this, because we believed the metaphor." And
okay.
And the point is, Richard said, you can think about it this way because your unconscious mind knows what the reality is anyway. And your and your timeline really isn't any of those things. That's just the way that you're representing it to yourself. So if you've got a good representation, your unconscious mind can take that representation and translate it into the language of the unconscious, which is something that we don't really know too much about, to be able to use it. It doesn't really have to be accurate to what's happening. It has to be acceptable to the client, and is a way of offering an idea, a concept to the unconscious mind, and then telling the unconscious mind, now you figure out how to best work with that. Have you ever had a headache and gone to a hypnotist and they had you put your headache in a balloon and watch it float off into the distance?
Yeah, I've actually used that similar techniques for myself.
Yeah. Well, and there ain't no balloon involved, is there?
No.
So again, we create this metaphor as though, we're saying having a headache is like, or this headache is like something that you can put in the basket of a balloon, or having a headache leave you is like watching something move off into the distance and fade away into space. And the unconscious mind knows how to work with that.
Well, yeah, if you think of things, I was thinking about this, like, heavy hand, have a balloon attached to this arm, doing a raising arm. There's no balloon.
Yeah. Or migraines. One of the things when I was first looking at migraines, when I was kind of new at this, and one of the things that I knew is useful for migraines anyway is to get the blood moving out of the head and into the feet. So the idea was to imagine warm feet and a cold head at the same time. Now you could imagine, because some headache sufferers, some migraine sufferers would do that. They would get a cold compress to put on their head, and then I don't know what they would do with their feet. In my mind's eye, I could imagine having my feet in front of a fireplace. I could imagine having ice on my head. I even had this one little image. It was kind of like a dolphin. I could imagine like when a dolphin's, and this is ridiculous. This is just what happens in people's brains. When the dolphin's nose is hitting the water, there's the cold there, but the dolphin's tail is up in the air in the sunlight where the sun is shining on it. And somehow that was enough of an image for me to hold something in my mind that said I can have hot and cold going on at the same time. But however it was that I represented it, the point is the underlying thing was this notion of two different temperatures at two different ends of the body, if you will, and the unconscious mind knows how to bring that about. Well, you just need to give it a representation that can allow that to happen.
Okay, I like that approach with showing how sensation, you can create metaphors simply for sensation. Okay, I'm looking at these notes I wrote down. Another thing that you were mentioned that you're going to be doing client elicited metaphors.
Yes, and that's what I really like. I mean, again, there is an idea. If you were to visit the Hypnosis Hall of Fame, I should be a little more respectful, and I kind of joke about the Hypnosis Hall of Fame only because when I hear the name of it, I think of like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but there really is a Hypnosis Hall of Fame.
My mind is just blown up. Where is this?
Well, it's a filing cabinet, and
I think I've heard this.
Of somebody's basement. In fact, we don't have all the stuff together, but actually, IMDHA has acquired it more recently, and Robert Otto and Roy Hunter, I think, are sort of the curators of it at this point. But it's been around for a long time, and they honor somebody every year. Becomes a member of the Hypnosis Hall of Fame. And but if there were one that was actually a brick and mortar Hypnosis Hall of Fame, here's the thing: out in front of it there would be a statue. Because there are statues in front of, museums and halls of fame. And my sense is that the statue in front of the Hypnosis Hall of Fame would have a woman sitting in a chair, a hysterical woman, because we owe the history of psychotherapy to hysterical women. And she'd be leaning back in the chair somehow. I can't do this on the screen, but, leaning back in the chair like St. Teresa in ecstasy. And standing up over her would be a hypnotist, looking down at her with these big eyes and this weird
pose, yeah.
With the idea that he's trying to put some ideas into her head. And quite honestly, I'm really serious about this notion of the client having the resources that they need. I don't think that I need to put ideas into people's heads. I think what I need to do, and what we need to do as hypnotists, is to open up a space where the wisdom that they have can actually come forward and work to resolve the issue that they've come to resolve. So I like to elicit metaphors from my clients. I want to know how they describe their problem. And according to Judy Reese, the clean language lady, people are generating 6 metaphors a minute in conversation, which is really rather insane idea. So when people say this course that I'm taking is really I was going to say is really a ball buster, but I'm not going to say that.
You're not going to say it like you just did.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to say that. Or my life these days is a roller coaster. So here's the metaphor. Now, if a client is going to describe their life as a roller coaster, what am I going to do instead is talk to them about climbing up a mountainside and the going gets kind of rough. Why should I be imposing my metaphor, which speaks well to my unconscious mind, on a client when I can learn how to elicit the metaphor from the client and to use what it is that they're offering?
It seems like there's so many things. If somebody brought up the whole thing about a metaphor, you wouldn't even have to go directly. I'm sorry, talking about their life being a roller coaster. You wouldn't even have to go directly into a roller coaster. You could even start off with the rest of the amusement park, cotton candies, so many different little opportunities.
Yeah, but again, initiated by the client, and that's exactly the thing, because they're already telling you, here's the way that I think about this already. So why should we say, well, that's all very interesting, but we're going to do it this way? Your life is like a roller coaster, you say. Well, Imagine that you could put that roller coaster in a balloon and, or some crazy ass
Yeah.
thing like that wouldn't make any sense. Right. So yeah, so use what they given. So we're going to do some exercises as a part of the metaphor workshop to literally learn how to elicit client-generated metaphors, so that you don't have to. When we were talking about metaphors at the beginning, you were saying, "Gosh, that sounds like a lot of work to be able to make up those stories." Well, it really is, and your client has been making up that story long before they ever came to see you.
Now, are there any specific techniques that you can mention now? That I don't want you to actually divulge any techniques, but is there any names that you have for the techniques that you use to elicit a client's metaphors?
Well, literally, I'm just going to listen when they start to describe the situation, and a simple question like, "Well, what's that like for you?" By the way, notice the linguistics of it. I'm not asking what it is. I'm asking what it's like, is going to generate a metaphor.
True.
You know,
Very, very clean language-esque.
yeah. Well, and that's what I think is that I think clean language is just one of the most beautiful things around, in terms of that purpose. So it will be an important part of the program. In fact, it's probably going to be like maybe not a quarter, but it's going to be a significant chunk of it, because part of it is going to be about generating metaphors. Part of it is going to be about eliciting them from clients. Part of them is going to be about using things like submodalities and all that stuff to make them more powerful. But then another part of it that I think is really useful and doesn't really get attended to in metaphor workshops. Because like I said, I think most people, when they hear about a metaphor workshop, they think it's going to be, let's learn how to tell stories. Are metaphoric tasks.
Ooh.
I
So
love the
kind of
idea.
like an Ericksonian task.
Absolutely. Every once in a while, I've got one example I can tell you from my own practice. I had a guy who came to see me who, um, I'm trying to think how to characterize this fellow. He was really socially awkward and uncomfortable. He stuttered. And it's a grown man, I mean, like 30 or 40 some years old. In fact, maybe even, yeah, into his 40s. Um, he couldn't hold down a job and stuff. I mean, he was so just socially kind of immobilized. And part of when I talked to him, if you wanted to go the route of regression to cause and stuff like that, then the very first session that we had, one of the things that came up was when he was in grade school, he stuttered, and he had a teacher who got him up in front of the class and got him to stutter for everybody, uh, and humiliated him, which just made it worse. That kind of stuff. So that's obviously one approach, and one approach that a lot of hypnotists would use. But one of the things that happened, I saw him several times, and he wasn't really connecting with other people in the community and stuff. So one day I was going to see him at my office, and I got out of my car, and who knows why, but for some reason, when I opened the door of my car, there on the ground in the parking lot was a baby shoe. Uh, just, a little baby shoe. So I picked it up for a variety of reasons. One of them is because, somebody had littered. I figured I might as well pick it up and bring it inside. But I brought it inside and I set it down on the table and forgot that it was there for a minute. And then my client came in and we started talking. He asked me, what's that baby shoe about? and immediately the gears started turning. My mind wanted to make some meaning and usefulness out of this, because
He's using a prime state. He's using that state of curiosity.
exactly. And so I said to him, I said, well, I can't tell you everything about it. I said, but there's something that I want you to do with this. And what I want you to do is I want you to take this baby shoe for a walk around the block every day this week at a set time, and I think we established like 5:30 or something like that in the evening. And he was willing. So and I said, you don't have to look stupid about it. You don't need to carry the baby shoe. You can put it in your pocket. But just take the baby shoe. He's like, well, what will that do? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You'll see. But just take it for a walk. And to be honest, I didn't know what would happen. I had no idea. But again, like I said, we are meaning makers, and I and I knew this guy was going to get something out of this experience. And besides, baby shoe did have a metaphoric meaning of its own in terms of first steps and all this stuff, right? So so he walked around the block where he lives, and actually, the block that he lives, a part of the block had a cemetery along one side of it. So he'd walk around the block and just a little ways into the cemetery, and then back around and back to his house. So he did it the first day, and at exactly the same time, he took that walk the second day. And because it was the same time, some things were happening that happened on a regular basis. There were certain neighbors coming home, just getting home from work and different things like that. And they saw him because they had seen him the day before. So after the second day, a couple of people would like smiled or waved at him. The third day he started having hello and a couple of words with people here and there. And by the end of the week, he had made like 4 new, speaking acquaintances in his neighborhood and folks that he could talk to and was quite comfortable about.
Interesting. So it's definitely a solution focused.
Sure.
So I've been reading a lot of O'Hanlon's books lately. So,
but notice, by the way, and it is, Antonio, and forgive me for interrupting you, it is solution focused, but it wasn't even so much me providing the solution.
It was him.
It was him. It was him. I said, take this baby shoe and walk around the block with it and see what happens.
And it caused him, I think, to be, from my point of view, it caused him to be more, I guess, aware of what was going on. Kind of took him out of his own environment.
Sure. Yeah. So it worked really well. And that's the kind of thing we're going to do. So metaphoric tasks. We'll take a couple of problem situations, clients and stuff, and figure out how can you generate tasks that would be useful for these people. So hopefully when people go home from this, not only will they be better able to tell stories if that's what they want to do, but they'll also really be better able to tell the stories that are going to be the best for their clients. And when they understand more about how their clients represent the situation to themselves, it is going to be the client's metaphor that will be even more powerful, so they can learn how to elicit that and how to use those. Go ahead.
You know, say what's interesting. So basically, I'm going to use this as some of the marketing for this. I like writing bullet points. Listen to the podcast later, writing bullet points. I think one bullet point would be discover how to use common everyday garbage to help your clients overcome their problems. Common everyday litter on the ground.
Yeah. But baby shoe is very special litter on the ground.
Oh yeah.
It was certainly placed there by some angel or another that definitely wanted me to, but that's my metaphor.
Yeah. It's placed for one angel for another angel.
Yeah. But a real full day of family fun that that I think we can have, and I'm especially looking forward to this one.
And so this one is a 2-day.
Nope, it's a 1 day.
Okay, I thought it was actually a 2-day. Am I looking at my notes wrong?
Just Thursday, the 24th.
Oh no, full day pre-conference.
Yes.
Okay, I mixed the words up. This sounds very interesting. So everybody that wants to go to this, look above or below this video. You will find a link to register for the class, and feel free to share this video. Feel free to leave a comment below, and also you'll see somewhere on this website where you can put your name, email, your name and your best email, and you will get instant access to a PDF that will help you to market some of your hypnosis products.
Excellent.
So we've got a good amount for this. Anything else you want to talk about your class?
I can't think of anything else that I need to say about it other than I hope people will come out, because I really think it's important when I do classes. They're not lectures. There's a little bit of that, but I really want to get people engaged, especially in the metaphor workshop, so that they've got some real skills when they go home. You're like me. I know you spend plenty of time on Facebook, and there's been a thread running lately about what books or courses do you recommend for people that want to learn NLP. One of the deals is books and videos and all that stuff are great. Thank God we've got them. And I'm doing more and more online training, by the way, all the time. So I think 80% of my client work is online these days.
It's great fill-in material.
In fact, I just put up a notice the other day. I'm teaching a class starting in July on how to work with clients online. And I mentioned it at the virtual chapter meeting last Tuesday night. And by less than 24 hours later, the class was filled. I had limited it to a dozen people, and I didn't even put out any advertisement. I think I put one little notice on Facebook that same day, and that was it. So folks really are wanting to get better about working online. I don't know why I say that other than that. So here's the thing that we're doing. But some people on Facebook have been having this discussion now about learning. And the thing is, you can learn a lot about NLP. You can learn about hypnosis from reading books. You can also learn about swimming and horse racing from reading books. And if you want to learn about hypnosis, that would be a way to go about it.
You need to get into it.
If you want to develop a skill, like, if you want to be a quarterback, you got to go to training, you got to have, you've got to to get your neurology engaged in it. You got to be moved through the processes with hopefully the guidance of a watchful eye that can help you hone your skills. I didn't have that much guidance at the beginning of my own experience with hypnosis. And the truth of the matter is there were a whole lot of bad habits that I had no idea were bad habits. They were just the way that I had sort of made up in my own head or understood in my own head that it was supposed to be done, and I didn't know any better. So I think you need both of them. And then, yes, by the way, Antonio, I've read all the books. So they're all out there and they're all good. And some of the recommendations that people are posting on Facebook, I'd say get them, no question.
So with that being said, get to his training. Now, on an end note, could you come up with a metaphor for two people, one person that went to the training and one person that missed out on it?
Sure. Let's see. It's funny.
I need a spotlight I can point on you.
You need a spotlight you can point on me. Okay, so here's the great metaphor. There's these two guys that died, and so they end up presenting themselves in front of St. Peter, who actually turns out to be standing in front of an elevator door, essentially, and he explains to them, well, there's as you know, there's a couple of places you can go. You can go up, or you can go down, and we're going to let you decide what you'd like to do. So they said, well, we want to check them out. Why don't we just go check them out, and then can we do that, and we'll make our decision. So they took the elevator. The first, of course, they went up, and there they are. It's heaven, clouds and harp playing and angels and all that lovely stuff, and peaceful and quiet. And that was nice. It was pleasant enough. And then they, got back to the ground floor, and they said, okay, so we've tried that one out. Now we want to go the other way. So they went down on the elevator, down on the elevator. And when the doors opened, they found it wasn't at all what they expected to find in hell. In fact, what it was like this big pub, and everybody was having a great time partying and celebrating, and they were shooting pool, and they were playing golf, and just having a lovely old time. And the guy says, well, gosh, this is a whole lot better than just that harp music and all that stuff. I mean, maybe we should pick this one. So again, the elevator takes them back to the ground floor. So they have to make their decision. St. Peter asks what they've chosen, and they says, well, we decided we want to go down. Thank you very much. He says, well, all right, have at it. So they got in the elevator. They went down. The doors opened again. And when the doors opened this time, they were greeted by fire and brimstone and a horned devil with a pitchfork and all that stuff. And it was just really scary and terrible. And they said, well, wait a minute. They said, when we came down here before, it was really nice and green and lovely, and people were playing pool and golfing and drinking and having a lovely time. And the devil says, well, he says, that was the campaign. Says this, this is the post-election reality. I really think that there's nothing more useful in the work that we do with our clients then the ability to take them somewhere where they can rearrange the way that they think about or relate to the situation that they're dealing with, which is what metaphors do for us. The first trance that most of us experience probably began with the words, once upon a time. There is nothing so powerful. There's nothing in our nature so strong. There's an image in my mind that I kind of live with. I want to do a hypnosis retreat, and an important part of that hypnosis retreat would be to have a campfire at night and somebody like James Hazelrig sitting next to it telling great stories.
He's got to have the kilt on, though.
Yeah, sure. But metaphors are so much a part of our bones that I think we often really don't realize the kind of impact that they have on us. The stories that we learned in childhood. Do you have a favorite childhood story?
Okay, actually, a really good one involves with hypnosis. I was real little. I think it was like 6 or 7. I walked up I was in my great grandma's house. I walk up and I see a bookshelf. I walk up and I see a book. I think it was Ellman's Green Book, clear as day. I pulled it out and said hypnosis. And I mean, I might have heard about it before. When I opened it up, I started reading about it. I think the little imp in me, I don't know if you can call it imp or just, like young boys have that desire to control everything.
Yeah.
It was just super curious. So I got home, and sure as hell, I went up to my room, grabbed all my stuffed animals, and hypnotized all of them. They're all somnambulists. That's been the long-running joke.
Sure. And you know what, Antonio, if you take the sort of classic stories, the sort of the fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, all of that stuff, or stories that we learned or were taught in school where it was actually a story, one of the things that's worth noticing, and when we were talking earlier about client-elicited metaphors, here's an interesting thing, is that in that story, there are characters that have certain qualities, that there's something. If you were to tell me that when you were a child, one of the stories that you really liked were like Robin Hood, for example, that would give me a great deal of information about what kind of qualities you considered to be important, what was noble and what wasn't noble, how you viewed the world. There's so much packed into that.
I loved horror movies, so.
Yeah, well, there you go. proves my point right there.
Hence the horoscopes.
One of my favorite horror movies, by the way, is Magic. Do you know this?
I don't think I've heard of it.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's old. It's quite old. It is Anthony Hopkins in one of his earliest movies. And he plays a ventriloquist. And he's got this failing act on Broadway, and he's going to go, or not in New York rather, and he's going to go on kind of a getaway retreat. And he goes to the town that he grew up in, and he stays in this little resort with, Anne Margaret is running the resort. And she had been a hottie when he was in high school, but she was way out of his league. So now he's taking an interest in her, and he goes and spends a little bit of time with her, and then he comes back down to his cabin at the resort, and the dummy starts talking to him.
I just looked up. I have seen that movie. It's very creepy.
It's very, very creepy. Yeah, it's lovely. My good friend Jess Marion, who loves horror stories.
Oh, does she? I did not know that about her.
Yeah, but she had a really hard time getting through this one. It was just a little too much. Clowns and dummies, I think are especially powerful images.
Well, hence It. They're coming out with you remember It? Stephen King. They're coming out with a remake of it pretty soon.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. This has been good. So this August in Hypnothoughts is the 25th, 26th, and 27th, I believe, right?
That's right. The metaphor class is the 24th, which is Thursday. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, of course, are the weekends. And then there's some post-conference things going on.
I'm still contemplating on doing either post or pre's. My sister just moved to Nevada, so I'm going to go see her and then try to work everything out.
By the way, if you don't have your hotel reservations and stuff, you need to take care of that stuff really quickly. And I'm not just saying this for you. I'm saying this for everybody listening, because this is also the weekend that the fight is happening. and that was announced not too long ago. And the rooms started. Now, speaking of a mixed metaphor, the rooms started flying off the shelves. So,
I know.
So it's important to get in there and get that taken care of.
I'm going to take care of that in a little bit. So my girlfriend will freak out if we don't get the rooms.
Yeah. All right.
So everybody, like this video. You know all the things to do. Leave a comment, jump on the newsletter. You'll get instant access to all of these podcasts, and you will learn how to promote and sell more of your trainings. It was great catching up.
Can I just throw one little plug in here at the very end? I'm sorry to do that. I have been operating the virtual chapter, which is a chapter meeting for hypnotists and their friends. It is the second Tuesday night of every month online. And people that are members of IACT and IMDHA get a notification about it through the organization. But you don't need to be a member, to do that. It just happens to be that it's an official chapter of them, but open to everybody. So if anybody would like to know anything about that, you can just drop me a note at FLHypno, Florida Hypnosis, right? FLHypno@outlook.com. And I'll be happy to put you on a list to notify you about the meetings. Our next meeting is the third Tuesday in July. Second Tuesday, in July. I think that's the 11th. And the guest that evening will be Shelley Stockwell. We just had Wendy Friesen. We just had a lady named Jan Prince that talked about language and covert language and hypnosis.
I know you had Jason Lynette not too long ago.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Lynette,
So
you got a lot of good ones.
We're getting really good people. And the reason that I like to plug this is that unlike local chapters, we're not limited by the geography in terms of who we can get to be our guests. So we're doing everything we can to get the best speakers and presenters for the meeting. And it's at 8 o'clock Florida time. So of course, out there in Aloha land, it's probably somewhere around 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I've been to a couple of them. There, folks, definitely get to them. They are well worth it.
Thanks so much.
It was great catching up, and I will see all of you guys in Vegas. Aloha.
Aloha.